Today, I will be talking with Kenan. Kenan works as a criminal prosecutor, which means that he represents the government and presents cases against people suspected of breaking the law through criminal activity. He has seen cases from drug trafficking to murder to rape. Pretty grim subject matter. Today, we'll be talking to him about his experiences in criminal law and any takeaways for regular people. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. So let's start at the beginning. You chose to practice criminal law, pretty grim subject matter. What made you interested in practicing this kind of law?
So I actually started out way back in college and undergrad. I started out wanting to be a doctor, and basically because I'm not great at chemistry, I was a semester behind going to med school, and I figured I would take some law classes because they sounded interesting. It was sociology in the law and law and culture. And I did really well in those classes. And so because I couldn't take my MCAT yet, I said, hey, I'll take my LSAT, which is the law school exam. And I did really well. So I said, why don't I keep this going and I'll apply to some law schools. And if I get in, maybe I'll do that instead. And I did that instead. So I went to George Mason, which is in Virginia, Northern Virginia, for a year before transferring back to Pittsburgh, which is where I did my undergraduate and finished law school. And even when I was going to school, I specialized, and actually my certificate and everything is in health law. So I had no intention in going into criminal law until I needed summer jobs, and I was able to work with a judge who, judges do all sorts of law, criminal, civil, family law, everything. And I saw how boring it could be to do non-criminal law because you're doing sort of the same thing every day. Where the criminal cases were always really interesting because it was always something different, always a new crime, being prosecuted, if you will.
Okay. So I definitely hear you about the variety that probably comes with criminal law, but what was it about it that kind of made it interesting and exciting rather than, oh my gosh, this kind of stuff is happening in the world and I just want to pretend like it doesn't happen? Like, what made it compelling?
You get to hear all sorts of different experiences and excuses sometimes, but also just reasoning for why things happened. And there is, like, I swear you just couldn't sit down and make it up. Like, it has to, if you have 1,000 people, that you see in a month, they all have different things that they think are important and different reasons for why they did something. So, I mean, even if you have the same case, even if you have, shoplifting case, and their shopliftings are fairly small and they're fairly similar, but when you talk to the defendants, I mean, they always have a different reason and a different, way they go about it. And it becomes really interesting.
Got it. So you've seen a lot of different cases over kind of your time practicing. Have there been any that have particularly stood the test of time?
So, I mean, there's definitely ones that I, bring up at cocktail parties and tell the story of that are fun to tell. The ones that actually like stick with me though are the ones that I, am not sure that the person should have gotten as much time as they got, if that makes sense. So I prosecuted last year a guy who recklessly / possibly intoxicated got in an accident and killed somebody. He had no criminal history, and he was coming from a doctor's visit in which he was given some narcotics, and he had worked the overnight shift before going to the doctor. So very tired, administered narcotics by a doctor, and then being allowed to drive home. And then he fell asleep at the wheel or, somehow lost control and hit somebody, ended up killing them. But as soon as the accident occurred, he jumps out of his vehicle. He's trying to provide aid. And it just so happened that the victim's daughter was the car in front of the victim. So the victim's daughter witnessed the whole thing happen. And I worked with the victim's family a lot. We had a lot of meetings about what we thought should happen. Again, person with no criminal history. And we ended up everyone agreeing to have him plead guilty to a vehicular manslaughter and then leave it up to the judge on what the sentencing would be. And he would be allowed to put on, any mitigation evidence. And I just put on the victim's daughter to allow her to speak to what she saw. And he ended up getting 3 years in prison, which was the cap, which was the maximum that we had agreed on that he could get. And I immediately afterwards went up to his family when I saw them in the hallway and apologized, because it wasn't what I thought was the just outcome. But I felt like the family of the victim needed to speak and tell the judge, how they felt about it. And so I felt, between the position of letting the victim speak and tell their story and what they thought should happen, which is that he should get, basically life in prison, versus what I felt more like, which is that he made a mistake. He was incredibly apologetic and contrite. And so I feel like 3 years is a long time. And I think a lot of people don't realize that 3 years, or really any amount of time in jail or prison, is a lot. It's our culture, I feel like, is very pro incarceration. And so I feel like that's reflected a lot in things like that, where the victims are asking that someone be put in jail for life, when I don't necessarily know that was a just outcome. But again, that's why we have judges. I feel like I did my part, which is allowed the victim's voice to be heard and, let the judge make a decision. Those are the ones that stick with me, I think, the most as far as cases that I've prosecuted. Most legal dramas are really bad as far as how they depict the law and how it's used, and how legal cases look like, all of that, what judges say at the bench, things like that. So you always have, the defense attorney is making this long-winded speech about why his person is an upstanding person, and the judge makes some long-winded speech about justice and stuff like that. And that's, we don't get those very often. More often it's, here is the evidence, and then the defense attorney says, actually that evidence doesn't prove the things you need to prove. And then the judge says, no, I think it does prove. And then he sentences. It's much quicker. There's not sort of the grandstanding that you see in legal dramas.
We're living in pretty dark times right now, and a lot of people are talking about mental health and taking care of themselves. You're someone who deals with pretty dark matter on a regular basis. Do you have any tips or advice about how you separate what you do at work and then how you can then come home and live a regular life?
I don't know that I have any tips. I much more feel like it's a job, and I could end up doing a different job and I would no longer be an attorney. Whereas I feel like, certain people, they're lawyers, no matter if, even if they were, working at the grocery store, they'd still be lawyers first. That's just the mindset that they're in. I don't feel like I have that. My dad always told me that you sort of just make the best of the situation that you're in. And he was a dentist for, I don't know, 30, 40 years. And then the day he retired, my mom, I think like the week he retired, my mom asked him if he wanted to read this dental magazine that still came to the house. And he was like, no, I'm not a dentist anymore. I'm not interested in it. And so I feel like I've taken that mindset in with me as well. And yeah, I mean, we certainly see some really dark images, and I mean, yeah, I've seen plenty of dead bodies. I've handled all sorts of different cases, sexual assaults and stuff like that. And I don't know. I don't know how to separate it out, except that um, it's not. I don't feel like being an attorney or even a prosecutor is like an inherent part of my personality. So like when I leave, I don't necessarily take it with me, I guess. Some very gory cases, if you tell it in a more funny way and you don't, talk about all of the body parts cut up or anything like that. Like if you just tell the funny side of things when meth heads make mistakes, then it's easier, I guess, to deal with and sanitize.
Gotcha. Funny meth head dramas. Let me tell you about my day. Oh. Who do you think are the people who would do well in criminal law? Clearly, maybe people who are able to separate things out and kind of not take it too seriously and take it home with them. Are there any other people that you think would do well in criminal law?
So I would say the people that I think do well in criminal law are people with a good sense of humor and with ADHD. Because, like I said, I did health law professionally for a very short period of time, and it was literally the same thing every day. And I was dying doing that. I couldn't stand it. And I mean, that probably haunts my memory more than any of my cases now. Uh, with criminal law, I feel like you're always on this treadmill, but they're always throwing different things at you on the treadmill. Whereas I've much more felt like on an assembly line, just rubber stamping when I worked in non-criminal fields.
Thank you so much for chatting with me today.
Yeah, absolutely.